The Sony ZV-E1 is an incredible camera that literally has stuff in it that cameras that cost twice the price does not have. And in this video, we're going to be walking through every setting, every menu that you need to go through as a video content creator to make sure that this camera is optimized for video. Now, you do want to make sure you're starting off with a full battery because this is an exhaustive video. We're only covering the video settings. We're not covering anything photos wise, but I would encourage you to go ahead, make changes to your photos for any thumbnails that you might change so that it's horizontal and that 16:9 aspect ratio, so you're not getting any kind of square files or anything like that. However, if you're into filmmaking or photography or anything like that, I'm not going in depth in that way. I'm going in depth for content creation. So as you guys have questions, feel free to comment those down below in the comment section. If you want to save on the hour plus that it's going to take to go through this video, maybe even pause it, do some other stuff, I would encourage you to maybe still watch it just to get the education side of things. But if you want to save on time so that you can get out and start creating, have your camera set up the same way I have mine, you actually can get access to the download file. If you're already a member of the Video Simplified membership community, this file is already available to you for download. If you actually want access and you just want to grab it for a couple bucks, it'll be available on the Buy Me a Coffee page. So that way you don't have to spend as much time. Maybe you can skip around, go to the sections that are important to you, and then just save on some time and actually go create. But otherwise, if you're good to go, you're ready to dive in, let's get through it because I'm not leaving anything out. So let's get to it. When we first dive into the camera menu, the thing we want to really understand is the breakdown of what we're looking at. The first menu that you'll see is your My menu. These are your custom settings of the things that you want specifically on your camera. These are the things that I access the most. Feel free to pause the screen and go through those, but I'll talk about those in a separate video. I don't want to bloat the video talking about things I personally use. The next one is the main menu. These are set up by default, and these are all touch enabled. So you can go through and change things like your recording frame rate. I like to use the variable shutter, especially when I'm indoors working with lights that are not video lights that can have the flickering and stuff like that. The variable shutter settings fix that. And so all of these are touch enabled, so that will cut down on things that you might need in the My menu. And then you have your main menu number 2, which has things like your log shooting setting, the APS-C or that Super 35, that S35 mode there, or full frame mode. If you fluctuate back and forth between those two settings, you'll see the Storm-1234, that's the file settings. That's what my camera is called, Storm. You also have things like your microphone directivity, and this will double up to some of the things that you'll see on screen that are touch enabled as well, but we're just going to go through the actual menu here. Next, we'll have the actual shooting setting. That's the red one. Then you have the purple menu, which is dealing with your exposure and your color. Next, we'll have the autofocus and manual focus settings, the playback settings, which we really won't need to spend a ton of time going through. Then we will have the network settings that'll control things like your Wi-Fi, your streaming connectivity options. And then we have the suitcase, or I like to call it the suitcase, it's toolbox, whatever you prefer. I like to call it suitcase, but that's the role of how we're going to go through each one of these line by line, menu by menu. Every item that I change for video, we don't need to go anything specifically with this main one. There's not really anything you can customize here. That's what your My menu setup is for. But I would encourage you to spend some time going through these because these are here, but a lot of these settings are also touch enabled on your actual screen of your camera. So when you go into the shooting setting, the image quality or recording, the file format, I like to use and switch between XAVC-SI, which is a very high setting when it comes to 4K. It's the best this camera can do. Or you can do the XAVC-HS. This is the H.265 codec. In 4K, this is usually what I'm in 90% of the time. It just depends on what I'm working on and what I prefer. But if you want to do that standard Sony 4K, it's going to be the XAVC-S 4K. So what you choose is between you and your preference, but I like to use the XAVC-HS 4K. That's that H.265 codec. Next, we'll move over into the movie settings. I like to use 24p. This is where you can choose 60p or 120p. This is another reason why you may not want to use the H.265 because you notice that there's no 30 frames per second. So if you do want to use 30 frames per second, you'll need to come back here into the file format, choose something else. So let's say you want to go for the Bees Knees Hall of Fame. you'll need to come back and then you can select something like 30. But you notice 120 frames per second is not available in this particular mode. So once again, you need to go back, choose something else. Let's say you want to go with the standard Sony 4K. For a lot of people, that's where they're probably going to find a home. And now you notice you have every setting available. So it just depends on what you prefer to shoot in. Because I do 24p, again, at H.265 serves me well. Then for the record setting, you'll come here and you can choose how many megabits per second that you want your stuff to be in, or the 422 or 420 10-bit. I just like to stick with the 422 10-bit depending on the settings or the mode that I am in. For right now, we'll just stick with the 420 10-bit for this particular setting because it's set up for my live stream setting. Next, we have the S&Q settings. These are your slow and your quick settings. This is something that I would encourage you to take some time and really get familiar with. The frame rate, or how fast or slow we want it to be. And I love that it gives you an idea of, like, if you put it in this mode, the shooting time required is going to be for 5-second movie recording, but you'll need to record total of 5 minutes. And so it lets you know how long you need just to get 5 seconds worth of a usable time lapse. And so I keep myself in 24p, and I like 1 frames per second. It just depends on what you're doing. But if you notice, the camera educates you a little bit on how long you need to record for in order to get, a 5-second clip, or so on and so forth. So that's what I like to use personally. Again, this will be something you need to dive a bit more into. As far as the settings, you do have a lot of options here. I like, just like if I'm vlogging or something like that, I just try to keep it low. Again, this is my live stream setting, so this is not typically what I would use. A good baseline would be this 50 megabits per second, the 422 10-bit. That'll get you some decent quality. But again, you want to go for the Bee's Knees Hall of Fame. You want to go for the highest setting. A little bit below that, depending on the SD card that you also have available to you, the 420 10-bit works as well. So you're still getting high quality files. Now you have your time lapse setting here, which the S&Q is where it's baked in. It's already done for you. Time lapse here is where you can customize and have way more flexibility. Again, my settings don't change for this, for the recording frame rate and how often I want that image to be taken. But this will be more of a traditional setup for this. Again, this is not my particular settings or what have you. You can even customize the video light setting and whatnot. I would encourage you to spend some time going through this. Again, that's something for a different video. Next up, we have the log shooting setting. Here, this is going to be something if you decide that you want to use it. If you turn it on, then you'll notice, okay, the camera needs to fluctuate back, and now we need to go back into the menu. Now, once you change that, S-Gamut 3 Cine or S-Log 3, this is where that S-Log 3 usually is. Anytime I am going to use S-Log 3, this is what I have mine set into. And then you can choose if you want to embed that LUT file or not. And if you enable this, it says whether or not to save the LUT file by linking it to the recorded movie. So once it's baked in, you can't take it off. But you can visibly see it. Those are different options there. But for me right now, S-Log 3 is going to be turned off. The camera will fluctuate and go back to the other menus. And then let's go back here. And then we go down to proxy settings. Proxy settings is something I really enjoy using. I highly encourage you to do so for those long recording formats, especially when you do the Bee's Knees Hall of Fame recording options. And you actually have some options here. You can do a H.265 in HD, so 1080p, or you can do XAVC-S HD, which will put you in the basic standard Sony HD here. And if you choose that option, you can see what your settings are. It's just going to be stuck there. So I like to use the HS, and that'll give me some flexibility of how I want my stuff to be. But proxy files is not something that you're going to use, so I just prefer to keep it as low as possible and as small as possible. And you can see here at the bottom the resolution. If you choose the XAVC-S HD, it's going to be 720p, 24 frames per second, because that's what I'm shooting in, 24 frames per second. And then if I go up here and choose the HS, that H.265, then I can choose for my proxy files to be 1080p, 24p, or I can choose that to be a little bit higher resolution. Quick pro tip here, if you ever are in a crunch or you just need to post something to social media, something like your stories or what have you, this is a great mode to actually get that content out faster, much smaller file sizes, and still have the Bee's Knees Hall of Fame high settings that you use, but also get a 1080p file as well. So I like to play with my proxy settings, just depending on what I'm doing. If I'm deleting them, we don't need them for anything right away. 720p is great. If I do want the option of using that file, then I'm going to put those in H.265 in 1080p, 24p, so I can get access to that. But for now, I'm just going to leave this set to off. I have mode set to when that's enabled or disabled. Next up, you'll see the APS-C Super 35 shooting mode, which when you're in 4K is not available on this camera because you can only crop in up to a 1.5 times crop. If you try to do anything else, you're not going to be able to get all the way to the 2 times crop, which is essentially putting you closer to the Super 35 mode. So you would need to disable 4K, go into something like 1080p, and then you'll be able to go into Super 35 mode depending on what lenses that you use. If you're using APS-C lenses on your camera, then you can just use clear image zoom depending on your stabilization mode. The last setting here within tab number 1 is going to be lens compensation. I just have this kind of set to off. You do have some customization options here. Again, I think depending on what you're shooting, what you're doing, and how you prefer this to work for you, then you can adjust based on the lenses, but I just kind of keep mine set to auto. It's not something I worry about a ton. Next, we're going down to media, which is not a ton here. We have the format, then we have the recoverage image database, and then we also have the display media info. All of these are currently grayed out since we're using the HDMI port, but that's just something important to know. If you ever need to find the format, you can have it here. I personally prefer to save that to the My Menu settings. If we go up here to the star real quick, one of the first things that I want on my first page is to format. So I don't have to go through the menus and deep dive in order to find that. It should already be there for me. Let's move on to tab number 3. All right, tab number 3 is the file menu. This is letting us know if we want to write the serial number. You can click over here whether or not you want the serial number. I don't need that, so I have that set to off. File settings. This is how I prefer to keep mine set up as a series. The series counter reset. If you want to start it all over, I don't care about that. Now the title file name format, I really do enjoy this because you can change it if you want it to be in whatever the standard format is, title, which is what you call it, the date and the title, or vice versa. I prefer to just keep mine set to title, and then I can come down here and choose what to call my camera. So since my camera is called Storm, if I got a second one, that one probably just would be ZV-E1 number 2, and then underscore is so that I know what I'm shooting. So between the ZV-E10, the ZV-E1, any camera that comes out in the future, then I know what the specific camera is. It's also good and a great idea if you're doing various projects to come in here and change the title name specifically maybe to that date and event code, and then you can save it and then it'll have the series number there. Moving down to tab number 4 to the shooting mode, mine currently is in a memory recall. That's why you see that MR camera set number 2. That's my live streaming setup, but you have multiple options here. Now, all of these are going to be set to whatever you want. And then when you have an SD card, you'll go over here into the M1, M2, and so on and so forth. But the way I have mine personally set up, we'll be talking about in a different video, but mine currently is set to the memory recall. But this is where you would find if you want to do the manual exposure, like your PASM, PASM, your aperture priority, shutter priority. And if you want to do intelligent auto, this is where you would switch to that mode. But currently I don't need access to that. And then if I did, then I could set it to intelligent auto or whatever the case is that you prefer. This is also where your memory recall, when you can set the memory to save it to any of these modes. So let's say you finally get your camera set up to all the things that you personally use in your main environment. That's an option that I would personally set to number 1. And then I come here and then I would save that. Since I'm not ready to save anything, I'm not going to choose that option, but that's just so you're aware. This is a quick function option that I like to save to my menu, just because it's something I will regularly use. The shutter speed and then the silent mode settings. If you do prefer to keep your camera on silent mode, then this is where you can have that, especially if you're in an environment where you want candid shots. You don't want people responding to what you're doing. Then you can turn that on or off as you see fit. And then you also have here where the aperture drive and autofocus, you can choose to adjust for that and go through more menus. Again, I don't tend to mess with this stuff. I keep it in standard and that works out really well. Release without the lens. For me, I personally have this enabled. So if my lens is off and I want to show an example in a video of what it looks like when you're taking a photo or a video, then you can see it. If you disable this, it will not work. So it's just up to you of what your personal preference is. If you do any kind of photos or something, you don't want to take accidental shots while you don't have the lens on, you can disable this. The anti-flicker setting is by far one of my favorites. And then the variable shutter, you turn that on, and then you can go into the variable shutter set. And now I can actually hit the anti-flicker scan. It'll figure out what that light is reading back at and adjust it for wherever I am. So when I was out of town, 50.7 was ideal for that particular environment. And so that's something I really, really enjoy, because as you switch from space to space, this works really, really well. I would encourage you to turn this on as you need it and then save it as a preset. And again, we'll talk about that in a different video. This is just going through the specific menu options. If you think you'll need that, go ahead and turn it on. That's something that you can save to your My Menu for later. For audio recording, I do encourage you to turn this on. It's the only way that you're going to get audio from your camera. Audio record levels is what your particular volume is that you want your stuff to be at. Usually I'm hovering somewhere between 13 and 17. That's usually where I am. It just depends on the environment. But I don't encourage you to put this in auto. Audio out timing, I'd leave this set to live. Wind noise reduction, I always have this set to off. It is never helpful. It's just better to deal with that per microphone, like using an actual wind muff on the camera or on the microphone itself. Microphone directivity is the new feature that Sony has, where you can have it set to auto, where depending on how someone is speaking, if you have people in front of you and on the side of you, it will decide what microphones to use. Whereas front is just if I'm in front of the camera, all directions, self-explanatory. And then the rear is really great. So when you're behind the camera. So if we take a look and I put this to rear and we go back to the microphone levels, now you'll see that the audio levels are hitting closer to that negative 12 decibels, where if I change this and we go back to it being to the front only, as if I was in front of the camera, it'll still be able to hear me, but you'll notice we're not hitting that negative 12 and my volume level has not changed. So it actually does make a difference. You'll still be able to be heard, but just not as well as you would hope. So I would adjust this to what you use the most, but this is something that's on the on-screen camera options. If you like those, you can leave those enabled or disable them, as you'll see in a bit. But I prefer to keep this set to front because that's 9 times out of 10 what I'm going to be using. Now here you can cut down on some of the options that you get. Whereas for me, it's either going to be all directions or front or the rear. I'm specifically choosing that. So if I'm never putting in an auto, I can deselect this option so that it literally is never going to show me the auto option, and it'll just cycle between these 3. If I don't want the all directions and I solely want to choose which is which, then I can select the center button on my camera and deselect that. And then those are the only 2 that are available. If you're not sure which ones you'd use, I just leave it set to all of them. And that's the way that I've left mine set up, and it's been helpful. But what I've noticed is I'm almost never putting it in auto. I'm specifically saying if I want all directions, front, rear, or whatever. And so we'll hit OK on that. This is the multi-interface shoe audio set options, which is currently not available because there is no microphone attached. So if you do get one of Sony's microphones that you put into the hot shoe that has the connections on there, this is the setting where you would come in and begin to adjust any of those audio settings, levels, and anything specific there. Now over here is your time code and user bit preset. Now, unless you're familiar with this, I wouldn't really change anything with this. You would need a timecode device in order for you to really work with this. So I'm going to skip this for the sake of this video, because most people aren't using this unless they're in certain environments and they're already pretty familiar with how to do so. Image stabilization is something that I like to have set really well across the board. You have the incredible dynamic active, the awesome active stabilization that still uses the IBIS in the camera and digital. But it's more IBIS based. Then you have standard, and then you have off. Depending on what you're doing or what have you, I would encourage you to probably at least keep it set to standard, if nothing else. If you're moving out and about and you want to get that handheld tripod look, then leave it set to active. But if you're on the go, probably set it to dynamic active. But I found that between active and dynamic active, those are some of the best options on the camera. Steady shot adjust, I just leave this set to auto. If you select this to manual, that's if you have a manual focusing lens. And so let's say I have a 12 millimeter or 13 or 14 millimeter, that's a manual focusing lens, then I want to adjust that. Otherwise, if all of your lenses have autofocus, just leave it set to auto. Now, the framing stabilizer is that awesome setting that Sony came up with where you would be tracked in the shot. Personally, I like to leave mine set to the center so that I'm always in the center, but you do get a few different options here, but adjust it to whatever it is that you personally think you'll use the most. But unless you need it, this is something I leave set to off until I actually am actively using it. Otherwise, you can save this in your quick menu options or your My Menu options. I like to have that available to me so I don't have to menu dive for that. Tab number 9, we have the zoom menu, where if you come over to zoom range, right now you'll see it set to optical zoom only. I actually never leave it in that setting. I put it into clear image zoom, but the way I have my camera set up for this video, you're not going to be able to select it, but you should be able to. I encourage clear image zoom. It is the cleanest version of a zoom that you can use outside of the optical one solely with the lens, but you can still use your lens zoom and clear image zoom when you have that selected. Digital zoom is something I never select. Yes, you could zoom in more, but the quality is worse. I'd rather do that in post if I need to. The step zoom magnification, I like to go all the way up to a 2x zoom if I need to while I'm actually out and about and I'm doing manual focus or something. 4x is just a bit too much. I don't feel like I ever need that. So I only have it set to these intervals of 1, 1.5, and then 2. For my zoom step, if you want to do that 4x crop in for the zoom magnification, go for the goal. But otherwise, I think up to 2 is plenty sufficient. For the zoom lever speed, that really helps with making sure that if you're on standby, you can zoom in faster if you prefer. Now, I like to do for recording 3. It's just their baseline. It looks very normal and natural, and you don't get any jitters. If you go any faster than that, then I found then when you enable it and you start using that zoom rocker while you're actively recording, it tends to make more jumps and it's more staccato and just very erratic. 3 is great for actively zooming. If the camera is not recording on standby and it's just I'm setting up the shot, then I like to use 5 and kind of move and get to where I need to get to. Now you can have a custom key zoom speed. I just leave these set to 3 by default for the fixed speeds because that's something that I'm never upset about. Remote zoom speed, if you're using any kind of Bluetooth remotes or what have you. Again, I have mine set to variable. I don't change a ton right out of the box, but you can if you want to. Again, I keep those set to 3 just because those always look normal and natural no matter what I'm doing or where I'm at. Tab number 10 is for the shooting display. Now for the grid line display on your screen so you can get the crosshairs, if you will, I like to leave this set to on. You can disable this if you pretty much want a clean screen, but I handle that with my display button. But I do like the rule of thirds. You can do a square grid or diagonal and a square grid, but the rule of thirds is pretty standard and that helps give me good positioning. Now the emphasized record display is so you see that red recording box on the screen. I enjoy seeing that and that's super helpful, but you can turn that off if you find that a bit more distracting. Now, last here we have the number 11, the marker display when it comes to your screen. I keep all this stuff set to off until I need it. When I want to see something, now I'm not going to go through each one of these, but when I do want to see something like for the center marker, that's helpful to know if you're having something actually in dead center. Aspect marker is really good. So if you want to know what the framing would look like for a vertical video, then I can come here and have that set to a 9:16. If you're doing any kind of square specific content, 1:1 is really great. And then they just have a ton of options so you can see what the true framing would be when you actually take that into editing. It doesn't automatically crop for you, but you can have the markers on screen. So the aspect marker is the only one I use. But the safety zone guide frame, again, I would encourage you to play around with these just to see if this is anything that might be useful for you. But the aspect marker as a content creator is the one I find most helpful. And then last up in the shooting menu option, we have the product showcase set, which I leave this set to off until I need it because I have that set in my custom buttons, but we'll go through that in a little bit here. Defocus level set, I don't play around with this at all. You could see if I had something on screen go from something being largely out of focus or a small amount out of focus. I don't tend to do this at all, but you can make that adjustments if you prefer. The cinematic vlog settings where you get the black bars, that's all of these options are available on screen, but this is where you can find those in the actual menu. The self timer is something that I have talked about in a previous video, but if you're not using that, I highly encourage you to do so. I really like to have this set to at least 5 seconds, depending on me doing regular videos. That way I have a buffer, but otherwise, like I said, I'm not going to dive into the what every little thing is in the menu, because that take forever. And this video is already super long. But when you go into the auto framing settings, this is something where, again, if you want that camera to track you around and you're using the AI and you enable this, now you can use that feature and you can decide if you want it to automatically start, if you want it to switch every 15 seconds, or if you want it to switch every 30 seconds and it's constantly zooming in and zooming out. I like to use a small crop level, and you can choose between you having more of a full body image if you want to see more of yourself, if you just kind of want that medium crop level and just kind of see from a little bit higher than the waist up. And then the large crop is kind of uncomfortable, so I encourage like at least do the medium or the small crop. Those seem to be the most normal. I like to keep mine set to small crop. And then the framing tracking speed, I've just found 2 to be really normal and natural looking, where 1 is too slow, 3 is kind of sporadic, and then 4 and 5 is just out of this world. But I prefer to keep that set to a 2. It just seems to be normal. Now here with the movie record in the streaming setting, you can choose if in the actual recording, do you want this to truly crop in or do you not? Because you can have it doing stuff on screen and decide if you want to record to an external recorder or via HDMI and not on the SD card. But when it comes to the SD card, if I'm cropping in, I want that image. If I'm using HDMI, then I don't. Meaning if I connect up an external monitor, I don't want to see the crop because that may be my safety recording. So if I do anything wrong or the camera does anything I don't particularly like, we don't have to use that file. We have the clean HDMI without any of that stuff enabled and embedded in the HDMI output. So I have that set to do not crop. Now we're here on the exposure and the color icon, your pink menu, and we have 6 different tabs here. This does not take a ton of time. These are not something that you're going to have to go through a ton. Now the auto slow shutter, if you want this to kind of slow down the shutter on its own, you can enable this or disable this, but it's up to you and your personal preference. Once you go into manual exposure mode, some of this stuff kind of doesn't matter. ISO set to auto currently because it's in like a vlog live streaming setup. I think still set to the vlog setting actually. But if you're vlogging, ISO auto may be fine. But what I do like, if you notice over here, if you come down here to the minimum, you can decide how high or how low you want the ISO to actually go in auto mode. So if I only want it to go down to, let's say, we can leave it at 100, but I don't want it going all the way up to 32. You can see we're getting way more noise. And I can say, you know what? I'm not digging any of that. Let's bring it down and let's just keep it at 40,000. Or I can go even lower and say, keep it at 12,800. So it's at that clean base ISO. It's up to you of what you choose. And then the camera, when it's in auto ISO, will only do what you prefer. I like to go to at least 32,000 so that I have range. I can always change this if I want. And then I like to bring this all the way to 80. And this is just my personal preference of what I'm doing when I'm in auto. But I typically don't need to go past 32,000, but I can always come in and change this. If you just want to go for the gold and the highest that the camera can possibly do, just run that number until it can't go any higher. Now your ISO range limit will dictate how high the camera can go in general. So I like to go for the Bees Knees Hall of Fame. If I just ever want to play in that space, I never have, but it's available to me if I want to. This is where you can set the ultimate ISO caps in the range for your camera. So at the lowest is at 40, and at the absolute highest, you have that 409,600 for the ISO range. Again, very extreme. I would probably never use it, but it's something I might show in an example in a video one day just to see how absurd it looks or how great it looks. Who knows? But for now, I just have it set to the best and the worst that the camera can do and leave it there. The exposure compensation is really great when you are in auto mode. For the exposure comp, I just like to keep mine set to 0.0, but you can increase this. So if you ever prefer your camera to default to a little bit brighter or a little bit lower, depending on what your settings are, then you can leave it there. Sometimes I like mine to be a little bit higher so I can go into that plus 0.3 and leave it there. As far as how quickly it steps from it being more exposed or under, I like to do the 0.3 exposure value and leave it there. Standard adjustments and all this other stuff, I don't mess with this. I just leave it set as is. Tab number 3 is going to be for metering mode. I like to keep mine set to multi, but you have all of your standard Sony settings here. Every blue moon, I'll come in and I'll change this. But right now, I just prefer to use the multi-metering mode. Face priority in multi-metering mode. I had good success and bad success with this in videos. So I personally leave this set to off. But if you want the camera to prioritize the lighting for your face, no matter what environment that you're in, I would encourage you to turn this to on. Spot metering point, I leave this set to the center. You can change this. Again, it's just my personal preference of leaving it set to the center. I've just found the best success with the multi-metering set to that. But I've just had the best success with the multi-metering set to multi, face priority set to off. I'm going to expose for it the way that I want it to look, not necessarily only for my face, because sometimes that can make you have very dark backgrounds unnecessary or very bright backgrounds unnecessarily because it's trying to get your face just right, where the camera is really good at figuring this stuff out on its own without that. For white balance, I actually really enjoy a lot of what the camera can do. Again, this is set to an auto setting right now just because it was set to previously for vlog settings, but you can come in here. You'll have all your standard settings here, but I like to come down to what I typically use. You can either set it to a specific temperature based on the lighting. A lot of people don't know this. You go over one more time, and if there's a green, a pink, or any kind of hue shift in the coloration, you can knock those out or add those in by adjusting that. Most people don't even play with this setting at all, but this is really good. So if you're getting too much green, just come away from the green a tick or two. I would encourage you to sit in front of the camera so you can see how it actually looks on your skin or in that environment. But I like to use set white balance settings depending on where I'm recording. So at home, this is usually going to be set up. Right now, these are not set up in this custom option, but I do like to keep the custom white balance to specific marks depending on where I'm recording. Otherwise, if I'm out and about, I like to keep it set to auto. For the priority set in auto white balance, I like to leave this set to standard, surprisingly, on this camera, where usually ambience priority has been where I sit. And this will give you a warmer hue to your skin tones and your environment. Whereas ambience white, it shifts a little bit too bluish. Just trying to get that pure white. Standard looks really good on this camera, and I found that to work well with multiple variations of skin tones. The shockless white balance is honestly one of the best settings on this camera that nobody talks about, where the camera will adjust how fast or how slow it adjusts the white balance when it's set to auto. 2 is really sweet. It's just a good medium mode, so no matter if I'm going from indoors to outdoors, where you can be in an event and it's super orange looking, you go outside and it's just nice and warm, it can adjust smoother than what most cameras can do. So the shockless white balance is a great setting that got pulled down from the A7S Mark III FX3 settings. If you want the camera to change this quickly, go ahead and put this into 1. If you want it to change it even slower, 2 is good, but I like to use, or 3 is good, excuse me, but I like to use 2. It's just really good, but the shockless white balance is the bee's knees on this camera. Color tone is not something that I really mess around with a lot. This is where the creative look is. If you're in an automatic setting, then you can adjust that more so. And when you go over here to your picture profile settings, you can go in and choose which picture profile setting that you actually prefer or that you like to use. When you scroll down here, you'll see that 7, 8, and 9 are missing. That's because your log profile settings have now moved to be a dedicated log setting in the camera. When you come down here to picture profile 10, this is where your HLG2 will be set to. If you like the S Cine in the camera, that's going to be picture profile 11. And then you can come in here to your specific settings here that you like to use for any specific LUTs that you've loaded. This is where those would be set to. So it's up to you of what you use and whatnot. But this is stuff where you can have this set to customize in here. And you get 4 of those options, which is really cool. You can select to use a LUT. Again, some of these options are grayed out because I'm connected via HDMI during the video, but you can make adjustments to that as well. Manage your user LUTs. This is where you would go in and you can actually import, edit, or delete your custom LUTs that you have that you like. So I can leave my custom log profile settings and stuff. So if I'm ever using it, I can set it to log in the camera, slap on my LUT, and it's already baked in, or at least can see it, just depending on what you want to do. So that's available to you. And then lastly, soft skin effect. I do like to have it on, but in low, anything more than that, and you tend to look really crazy. And then if you just want a super clean shot, just leave it set to off. But sometimes the camera is a little too sharp and we don't need to see all the blemishes. So low works very natural and normal. Last up is the zebra display in the exposure menu here. And sometimes I do like to have this set to on. And when you do set it to on, you can have custom levels, or you can go to some of the preset levels. If you've never experimented with using zebras to set the exposure, it's a very valuable tool in a lot of these Sony cameras. But for now, it's set to off until I need it. Whew, you have been champing through this thing. We're about halfway through this camera, and there are some settings that don't seem like some things that maybe you need to change or make adjustments to. Now, there are some things that we'll probably skip over a little bit in the next couple of menus, just because there's not a ton that we need to change on some of the things. So you don't have to go through every little thing. Feel free to skip around on some of these sections if you don't feel like it's relevant to you. However, when it comes to the focus area that we're about to get into in this next section, I want you to be in front of the camera. Pause the video so that when you look at how fast something is focusing, do stuff that you would normally do in your regular video. So if you know in your vlogging shots, you kind of like to walk in from the door or something like that, do a shot like that and record that while you're doing it, and say on camera like that my autofocus is set to 3 out of the 5 settings, and just see, make the adjustment, and then say now it's at 4. Do the motion again and then put it at 5 and see which one visually looks like the way that you want. This is exactly what I did when going through any of my camera settings where it had to be specific to how quickly it autofocuses, how quickly the white balance changes, and things like that. So that stuff will really help you to dial in the way that it looks, because the last thing that you want is to have your video look too jittery or crazy and you're blaming the camera for things that you could change in the settings. So while we're here, let's just go ahead and change that. So feel free to pause the video, do those quick tests. It'll probably take you maybe 2 or 3 minutes. And then once you know what those settings in, it's locked in, you can set it and forget it. But let's go ahead and get into the focus menu. Let's get into the autofocus and manual focus settings. Once you set these, you can kind of forget these unless you need to change them. But when we get over here to tab number 1, I like to keep mine set to continuous autofocus. If you want to do manual focus, then you can select that usually on the lens, or you can set that to quick function icons if you prefer. But I just like to keep mine set there. Autofocus transition speed, I like mine to be fast. So I have mine set to 7. From there, I have my autofocus subject shift sensitivity set to 5. And this, again, is fast because the camera can do it and it can keep up and it looks natural and normal. If you want that to be a bit slower, you can do that. Autofocus assist is a really cool setting that is available in your camera. I just leave mine set to on. And if I ever need it, it's there for me. Tab number 2, we're going to get into the focus areas. I leave mine set to wide so that when I'm going through, everything that I need is within focus. Occasionally, I may set this to zone if I only want a specific section to be in focus. This is good if you're recording talks. Maybe you have people moving in and out the room and you just really want to record a certain area or what have you. And then the flexible spot is not something that I really use. 9 times out of 10 for my recording, but otherwise I keep mine set to wide for 90% of the time. The focus area limit, these are all the options that are available to you. If you notice, I only had a few available, but you have center fix. You also have the flexible spot being small or medium. And then you have the expanded spot where you can change it and whatnot. So if I adjust this and turn that one set to on, then click OK and save it. When I go back to my focus area, now you'll see I have that new option there for me if I want to use this. And then you can move that around, choose what you want, and then just go from there. But I personally don't need that 9 times out of 10. And so when I go back over here, I can just choose whatever I usually use, which is wide, then come back in here and I'm good to go. The focus area color, I like to keep this set to white. Red sometimes tends to blend in, but it's up to you of what you want your icons to look like. For these last 2 options here, I just keep this to does not circulate and standard. This is not anything that I've ever had to change or adjust, and the camera operates perfectly without changing anything there. Moving over to tab number 3 for subject recognition. This is where if you need to change it from animal to insect or humans or cars, you can do that. So the subject recognition for the autofocus is set to on. It's set to human because this is something I can change on screen if I ever need to. Recognition for the target select. I don't necessarily need for animal, bird, or even insect, but I have those options selected if I want to use them. Animal or bird, you see it's kind of in there twice. If you know you need specific animals or you're more focused only on birds, then select those options if that's something you prefer to record. Otherwise, I feel like the camera is smart enough in identifying what kind of an animal or bird it is, and I don't need to be specific so that it's only paying attention to birds or only paying attention to certain kind of animals. The left or right eye selection, I leave it set to auto and let the camera decide whichever one it thinks is best. But you can specify if you only want the right eye or the left eye to be focused in on, depending on who you're shooting or what environments that you're in or how your setup is. I leave it set to auto because the camera is extremely efficient in doing it on its own. Subject recognition form display, I leave this set to on. Face memory, you can save your actual face. And so because sometimes when I'm vlogging, I will have my head covered. So I have one set there. And I have one set where it's just my hair down so it can see what I look like and prioritize me over anybody else. So that's super helpful going through airports and stuff like that, or just traveling. Face registration priority is so that it will actually take the memory of my face and prioritize that. So that is set to on. If you don't care about any of that stuff, you can just leave it set to off. Tab number 4, the focus assist. Focus map is something that's really, really neat and super helpful, but I leave mine set to off for my live streaming mode. If you have other modes or certain environments or situations that you're in where that is helpful, this is where you would come to save this. I encourage saving this to your My Menu option, and I'll show you how to do that at the end of going through this whole menu, just so you know how to add something or delete something. But I don't use this often at all. The focus magnifier, again, this is something that we've talked about before a little bit ago, how long that magnification icon stays available. I have this set to no limit because I want to decide when that goes away versus the 2 and 5 seconds. It's just not helpful and it causes more issues than a little bit. In my initial focus magnification, whether I have autofocus on and I switched to manual focus, I want this to just be at a 1.0 times X because the 4 is a little bit absurd. Even for the finest of things, 1 point times is enough, and I can always add in more if I want. For the peaking display, this is so that you get those dots or those icons around whatever it is that you're having in focus or out of focus. For the peaking display, I usually set this to off. But the cool thing with the ZV-E1 is that you can actually have this set to on, still be in autofocus, and see the peaking icons. Now, the peaking level, I have this set to mid or the middle. It's up to you if you want to use this. And then the peaking color, I have this set to red because in nature or in natural environments, you don't see a ton of red, whereas yellow, blue, and white are more keen to what people would actually wear in their face and just all kinds of things. So red is something that stands out a bit easier than some of the other colors that I've tried, but choose whichever you prefer. And it is good to change that depending on what environments or situations. So if you're outdoors, then something like a white may be helpful, or red or yellow. In the playback menu, it's not something I find that I need to change almost anything ever. So everything is set straight out of the box, the magnification, the selection, and the memo. This is helpful if you do want to do the ratings. So that way, if you're taking a photo or video and you want to rate those are super helpful. So you'll get a certain star. So let's say you want to see what's the best clips versus the worst clips. This is a helpful something. If you know you're never going to mark something as a 1 star, you can deselect whichever ones you don't think you would use. But I do like to use the ratings. So if I'm going through rating clips to see which are the good ones, which are the bad ones, I do like to use those. The delete function is something that I do want to make sure that we cover really quickly. Delete by pressing twice is set to off. If you feel like you don't want to accidentally delete anything, go ahead and turn this set to on. And then I do have it personally set to confirm if I'm about to delete something or cancel. But other than that, these options work great for me. I've never accidentally deleted something, but if you think you might, go ahead and set the delete by pressing twice, set to on, and then confirm it by canceling it first. The edit options for you to be able to crop, rotate your photos, or if you want the HEIF or HEIF or versus JPEG switch, I like to use JPEG. If you prefer something that's closer to what your phones and stuff would use, you can change these settings here. This is not anything I've ever done. I do like to use the playback speed for interval set to 5. So again, it's just a good middle setting. You can usually find this stuff set by default. Playback options, you can have the display as a group set to on, so you can see when you take multiple successions of photos back to back, then it groups all of those in one group versus you seeing a bunch of individual shots. That helps cut down on the review process in camera. Display rotation, if you don't want to see the camera, which sometimes you want the camera orientation for the screen to stay the way that it is, you can turn this from auto to manual, or you can turn it off. I like to keep mine set to auto because I almost never need to adjust for that. Focus frame display, I don't need to see what was in focus or out of focus or whatever the case is during so some of this stuff is not anything I ever need to change, but these are the settings just so you can see them. So we're in the home stretch now, and we have the network setting, which there are quite a few things here you may want to save to your My Menu. Some of these icons and options are grayed out, again, just as I've said a few times here, based on the way I have the camera set up. But over here in the select and camera send, when you use the shot marker options that I've talked about in previous videos, you can choose if you want it to cut based on every 15, 30, or 60 seconds, or don't cut at all. So it's up to you depending on how you want to use this. Now you can set it to don't cut anything, and it won't cut anything. If you decide every 30 seconds you want it to cut, as you can see here, it says a 30-second movie with the shot marker set as the center will be cut. So you can choose how you want those depending on how you have the shot markers used. I just use the shot markers for reference, but this is a good option to play around with and see if that can be helpful for you, because the camera can cut out the bits that you don't want, export it to your phone, and you only get the goods. Now for the proxy sending, you can choose if you want it to send you only the proxy file, so a smaller resolution file, the original, or both. Just depends on what you're doing. I would experiment with both of these because sometimes, again, that proxy file, even though it's a lower quality than the original, it is still really good to use. So most of the time, I just only need the proxies, but based on your personal use case and preference, you can choose which of these you actually prefer. Otherwise, there's not a whole lot here within that first option that we'll use. So we go down to tab number 2 and you'll see the USB streaming option. This is where you decide when you are streaming via USB. Do you want it to be in that 4K 30, 4K 15 frames per second is not an option I would recommend using because it just will look weird. You can use the 1080p 60, 1080p 30, or 720p 30, which does not look great either. But depending on what cable you have connected will dictate sometimes what options are available here. So it's not a camera thing. Make sure you have the right cable if you're doing 4K 30. And then the ability to record while you're streaming, I have set to enable because there are times where I may be doing a presentation or some kind of an event where the camera is hooked up via a live stream environment, but I also need to record it to my SD card. So I do want that option, even if I'm connected via USB. Next, we have the Wi-Fi that's set up, and other than connecting this to your phone, there's not a whole lot of anything that I change here. But the cool thing is with the ZV-E1, because this camera has the 5Gs embedded into the camera, the 5 gigahertz, you can choose if you want it to be on that 2.4 gigahertz band or 5 gigahertz band. Up to you on how you use this. I personally just currently keep mine set to the 2.4 gigahertz, but I do think there will come a time where we start playing and adjusting with that. Now, quick pro tip, I just want to slide in here in between this settings video to make sure that when you're doing the Wi-Fi settings, don't just pick the Bee's Knees Hall of Fame best settings for live streaming. You want to make sure that you test this stuff. So if you decide that certain settings would look great for you or you want that, hook it up in that way. Make sure you use all the cables that you would actually use. So if you need to order better ones, be sure to do so. I'm going to put my link to recommendations for the best cables for like USB streaming or HDMI streaming down in the description of this video, but make sure that you actually set it up to test, because what you may find is you need to switch a different port, you need a better cable or something like that, depending on that. There is a video that I did. You don't need to click over to it now, but maybe save it for later, that I'll put up in the information card about glitchy videos. So if you notice that it's looking real stuttery, jittery, and ugly, then it's some settings and stuff that we can change for that specifically. And that's usually around, like I said, some stuff to make sure it changed. But either way, just want to make sure that you're aware. Take some time and do that before you schedule a stream and then it not look the way that you want. So let's get back into the settings. We're almost done. For Bluetooth, I don't do a whole bunch with this. You can adjust what devices you've paired with your camera before, delete those, clear it up. I'm not going to just go through any of those things. That's really not anything you would honestly change. The wired LAN, again, not something we'd really go through and change. The USB and LAN tethering is not something, again, you would have to know what the setting is for you to know if it's going to be useful to you or not. So I'm not going to dive into that because 90% of the people watching this video, if not 99, are not going to need that. Now for the network option, for the airplane mode, I do keep my camera in airplane mode set to on 99% of the time. Number one, it not only helps save with the battery, but it also just helps when I'm flying and I don't think to do that. So this is a helpful mode. I just have always had my camera set with airplane mode on. And it also helps to not have the Wi-Fi or Bluetooth working unnecessarily if I'm not even actively using it. Here you have where you can change your device's name. Again, if you're doing any kind of events or anything like that, you would be very well served by changing it based on the event and then the date and saving that here. That way, per SD card, you're able to see what that device is called or whatever. But for me, I just keep it the same as my SD card settings because I don't ever need to do that. These other options are not anything you'll likely ever need to change. I will leave these set to straight out of the box. The last setup menu here, we are almost at the home stretch here. Area and date, these are things you likely would have set based on your camera coming out of the box. So I would encourage you to adjust accordingly. NTSC and PAL is something that you do want to make sure is set up correctly. NTSC is if you're in the United States. PAL is going to be based on other countries depending on where you're located. So I'd encourage you to do a quick Google check on that. But if you're in the US, then you're going to be using NTSC. Reset in the save settings, which is really cool. I talked about this in the very beginning of this video. If you are part of the membership community, then you can get access to all of my settings in my camera. And this is where you would come to actually load those specific settings. If I wanted to reset the camera, then I can go ahead and do that here. Otherwise, to load those profiles that I shared with you, this is where you would come down here in order to load and save those settings. For the operation customization, this is where I find a lot of value is saved depending on your photo-based settings. You would go through here and adjust for what buttons you want to do what. Then for the videos, I'm not going to go through the photo options in this particular one. This is only based on video. I like to go through and I'll show you exactly how I have my camera set up, but we'll do a dedicated video on this as well. The step zoom is going to be based on that C2. This will be native straight out of the box. So you can go through, hit clear image zoom, go straight to that 1.5 times crop if you prefer, just by hitting the button one time. Auto exposure lock, I like that set to the trash can icon. I have the My Dial, which again, we'll talk about in my custom video of what this is specifically, but this is one of my favorite settings in this camera. And the other one is the autofocus and manual focus toggle. This is something I brought over for my ZV-E10 setting. So no matter what I'm doing, I can quickly change from autofocus or manual focus with this quick button, whether the lens has a switch on it or not. ISO usually is pretty much standard no matter what you're doing. And then the auto white balance lock, I have been waiting for this on a ZV camera for so long, but this is something I missed on the ZV-1 and ZV-10, but it can lock the white balance when I'm in auto mode, so I don't have to worry about it. So this is a setting I highly encourage you to set up somewhere on the camera. For me personally, when I'm setting the top dials, I do like to keep the movie button set to doing the movie recordings, but I get rid of the bokeh button and change that to my audio record level button because that's something I need way more than I ever would the bokeh button, which I never use. So if you like to keep it as the bokeh button, you can keep it there or adjust it. But I'm always using the audio record levels because I need to adjust that 90% of the time. When I have a lens like the Sony 11mm f1.8 that I want to press the button, or that Sony 15mm G lens that has a button on the side, I like to save and add a shot mark, which is a feature that's really native to this camera. It's amazing. And I like to just hit that button and do that. Or depending on what environment that I'm in, or if I'm in my vlog settings, then I have that set up a bit differently and I will change that to record for me. Because sometimes when you're holding the lens, it's just easier to hit that button and start and stop recording versus tapping on the top. So I do like to play with that option depending on what settings I'm in. Now, this is the My Dial settings that I talked about a little bit before, but I do have this option checked at the top to separate the manual exposure mode versus the other modes. If I'm in S&Q mode, that's slow and the quick, the video, or the manual exposure, I do want it to be ISO and then aperture priority or shutter priority, then I can adjust that with the dial. I can change this so if I'm in any other mode, so if I'm in intelligent auto, if I'm in photos or something, then I can adjust for that. For right now in this particular setup, I haven't changed that, and I don't change this often, but this is something that you can do. But I do like to have the option to keep it separate. You can uncheck that if you know you just want to keep it the same. So no matter what, the top dial is going to adjust the ISO or something else. Some people like to have that set for the aperture or white balance even. I like to use it for ISO. But because I know I want the option to do something differently, then this is usually what I'm going to choose. Your custom key for the playback settings, I don't make any adjustments here, really based out of the camera, but you can play around with this depending on what you will find most helpful when you're doing playback options. Now, the quick function menu settings is something I like to adjust. The top half of the screen is going to be for your photo-based settings, but when we come down here to video-based settings, I'll go through really quickly what I like to use, which is the white balance. I like to file format, so I can adjust for that for my video settings. I also have my record settings that are here as well. The focus area, auto reframing, the frame rate, so I can adjust what that is, how many frames per second, depending on what I'm doing. Steady shot, and I have my variable shutter speed, so if I ever need to turn on that anti-flicker mode and stuff, I can. The framing stabilizer, the peaking display, then I have my picture profile. So my marker display is when I like to swipe up on any of my settings, know that I can quickly get to any of these to quickly show me what that 9:16 frame is or what have you, or get to any of these other settings I can, and then swipe down to make that menu go away. Again, my stuff differs from photos depending on what I'm doing, but that's not really something I change a lot. But some helpful ones would be like the silent mode, and quiet as kept. You can still do the variable shutter in photo mode, which I don't understand people talking about banding, because that's available to you in photo. So I don't think people are going through the menus. The display screen setting is if you want to see certain icons and stuff on your screen. I have displayed all the info so I can see everything. No info is displayed, so I can get a clear image of what to see. The exposure I do want to keep there. I don't want it to time out or go away. The histogram is not something I generally tend to use on this camera. And then the level display is something I use a lot just to make sure the camera is leveled. But you can leave all of these options available. A lot of people do get value out of the histogram, so if you think that's something you might use, go ahead and select that option there. And recording with the shutter button is something I enjoy doing, even though you do have a record button. I just have my muscle memory set to hit that shutter button while I'm in movie mode, so this is something I have enabled. If you want to disable that, you can. And then the zoom ring rotation is not something I adjust, but this is something that is available to you. It's saying that it's disabled based on the fact that I have this camera set up via HDMI, but that is something that you can change. The My Dial setting is something I'm going to go through in a different video, but this is how I have mine currently set up, so that if I press the center button, I can go from exposure value compensation to the aperture or the white balance temperature on the camera. And this is super duper helpful. You can even change and have the custom wheel on the camera do something else, but that's just what I prefer so I can quickly cycle through options, but that's super duper helpful. The shutter and aperture rotation, I just keep this set to normal. I don't try to do anything special with that. Dial and wheel lock, keep this to unlock. You can lock this. So as the explanation says, you can set the function so that it displays the dial or the wheel temporarily. Hold the function to lock it. Sometimes this is helpful so that when you're traveling, because there's been several times where I'm vlogging and I accidentally will hit something. So if you know your settings are good, you're rolling in auto or pretty much have your stuff dialed in, then you can set it so that it locks so you don't accidentally hit anything. So this is something that would be super helpful to actually have access to and enable or disable as you need to. But if you feel like that would kind of hold you up or frustrate you, leave it set to unlock. The touch operation is something that a lot of people get value out of making some adjustments to. I leave this set to on. For the shooting screen, I do leave all of these set to on. This allows me to use those new options for the on-screen menus. You can't make any customization changes to that on the ZV-E1. Maybe on future camera models, you will be able to customize those. But if you simply want to turn those off, you can. So if you don't want to swipe left and swipe right and all of that, then you can either change how these come on the screen or completely turn them off. I kind of leave this set as is. Swiping up for the function menu to become visible or not, I leave this set to on, but you can turn that off. And then the icon when the monitor is flipped, I have mine set to go ahead and flip with it versus do not flip. But if you don't want or like any of those on-screen touch options, you can disable that here. And then for the playback screen and the menu screen, I currently have those set to on. I do not encourage that you change those, just leave those set as is, because sometimes you can go and make these changes and you'll lose how to go back and fix it, and it's just not worth messing up. The accessibility is something that can be helpful if you have a hearing aid or you have a hearing disability, so that the screen recorder, as you're scrolling through, audibly reads those things back to you. And so you can adjust what the volume is when she's speaking to you, if this is enabled, or how fast or slow that you want her to read for you. So if you do have any hearing impairments whatsoever, then this can be helpful. The monitor display is something I change quite often. So if you're out and about, you can change that to sunny weather, or you can adjust this so that it is set to manual. And all you do is select that option and it will change for you. If I'm in manual, it'll be set to -1. If I select this option here, then sunny weather will pop up and then it just stays bright. And I'm just used to seeing the sunny weather, so I leave it there. It has a little bit drain on the battery, but not enough to throw a stick at. Display quality, I do have that set to high. And then for the monitor flip direction, I do leave this set to auto. The display option here, I'm not finding where I make any adjustments here. So all of these are set straight out of the box. For the power save option, you would have already most of the time enabled some of these as soon as you took this camera out of the box. If you bought a used camera, you may need to make some adjustments here. So the auto monitor, I do have this set to, it does not turn off versus it timing out. For the power save start time, I currently have this set to off, so my camera does not go to sleep at any point. And then the power save by monitor, I have this set to both linked. So if I close the screen with the screen facing towards the camera goes to sleep. And then if I open the screen, then the camera re-enables. So this has been super helpful when I'm vlogging. So this is something that I did make a change to, but you can have this set to does not link so that it doesn't do that, or make the adjustments as you prefer here based on the options on the screen. For the auto power off temperature, you would have set this to high right out of the box. But if it's set to standard, go ahead and set that to high, especially on the ZV-E1. For the sound options, again, this is going to show you again your volume settings. Currently, I just have this set to channel 1, channel 2. And then the audio signals, you can have it set to the shutter only, or just turn it all the way off so you're not hearing anything. But there is no shutter in the camera, so that shutter is just a signal to me that I've actually taken a photo when I do, versus it actually not playing any noise whatsoever, which can seem a little bit weird unless you're in silent mode. For the USB, this is something I did make a change to that's been super helpful when you're having it connected USB connection mode. When I select this camera, or when I plug in a USB-C cable, I want the option to choose if I need to use USB streaming, mass storage, or something else depending what I'm doing. If I need to do streaming, then I just want to select streaming. If I need the PC remote option for using it with a program or something, then I want that. If I want mass storage, I just want to be able to choose it right away instead of defaulting to one option or another, because I'm not always doing streaming. I'm not always doing anything else. And then as far as the USB setting here, I have this set to multi. I don't change this. And then for the USB power supply, so that I am getting power when connected via USB-C, and it'll charge the battery, then I have this currently set to on. With a good enough cable, you can stream and charge your camera at the same time, so it's not progressively draining. For the external output, like you'll see here, for the HDMI resolution, I have this currently set to 2160p, which is the highest that it can do. I would not use the 1080p the interlace, unless you absolutely know why you're using that. Don't touch it. So it's either going to be 1080p or 2160p. I like to go for the gold and use the best the camera can do. For the HDMI output settings, this is going to be indicative to when I connect this camera up via HDMI. Do I want to record the media via HDMI? Yes, we've talked about this before. Output resolution, the highest that it can do. This option, when you're doing 4K via HDMI, will become available, but because of the way, again, I'm setting this video up, you can't see that. Timecode output currently set to off. Recording control, That's not currently available as is set up now, but you can come down here and make some adjustments if you prefer when it's off. And then at the very bottom of the screen, you can see if you have a monitor connected, you'll get 2160p. Whereas the SD card in the camera, you're going to do XAVC HS 4K 24p 100 megabits per second like we set up before. And so that icon at the bottom of the screen is showing you what you'll see depending on what's connected. So if we change this to 1080p, you'll see that when we go back to that menu option and we select what that is, it's now saying when you connect the monitor, you'll now see 1080p instead of the 2160p. So that's how you can read that screen. A lot of people overlook that, but that's something that's super duper helpful to understand. Now for the HDMI info display, you actually want this set to off so that you can see what I'm doing on the screen. It's set to on, but turn this off. Otherwise, you'll see all your icons. You'll see your autofocus box and all of that stuff. This camera has clean HDMI, so use it. So we don't want to see anything. We just want to see the beautiful image that you create. So if you have it set up for live streaming, set the HDMI info display to off. Control via HDMI is currently set to on, but this is not anything you'll have to worry about. And the last of the Mohicans here, the setup option for the video light mode, you can set this so that you see where it says power link, record link, or what have you. Now, if you have this set to record link, what happens is, as it states, the video light turns on and off in sync with the recording starting and stopping. However, if you change it to power link, then as it says, the video light turns on and off in sync with the on and off operation of the device. I just keep mine set to power link because I really kind of don't care. But if you do, you can. The recording light is the tally light on the front of the camera. I currently have mine set to off. I already have where the red box is around the screen to show me that I'm recording. And if you're ever recording through a window, you don't want that red light reflecting back on the screen. So that is why I usually have mine set to off. So I don't see that, or if somebody doesn't have glasses that has the anti-reflective coating, you'll see that red light glaring back. So I just found it more helpful to turn that off in certain situations. Sensor cleaning is something you want to do on a regular basis, as well as pixel mapping may become something that you'll see pop up occasionally. And that's just the camera doing basic settings inside itself to give you the best image and the best quality possible. Now for the version of the camera, this will let you know if you have the firmware update that came with the 120p or not. So you'll see the version 1.01 or a latter one if it becomes available, in addition to what version your lens is. So you may have seen where I talked about the Tamron 20mm lens. That lens has firmware updates on it, so you'll see different versions. If your lens doesn't, then it's fine, but this is where you would come if you need to do any kind of software updates. Serial number, privacy notice, and those latter settings here dealing with your licenses. This is where you'll also see if you come over to your license list, you'll know if you have that 4K 120 recording or anything else that comes out in a future date that is available on the camera. So it wasn't a true firmware update on the ZV-E1. It was really a license being added here that gave you the update when it updated the firmware. So that's why you see this 4K 120 recording there, because it was an actual licensed product. All right, creators, we have made it through all of the main menus for the Sony ZV-E1 for this settings video. Now, I'm going to go over into my stuff that I use for my menu setup. This is honestly what I use 99% of the time. Very rarely do I need to actually go through everything that we just went through again. It literally is a set it and forget it, and you can optimize your camera around that. Now, I'm going to be doing a dedicated video that I'll put in the information card as well as in the description down below once it's available, that will walk you through how I optimize this as I'm actually creating to make sure that I get things set up. So I'm not going to cover a ton of the main my menu video part right here, but I do want you to know, just think about how you create the stuff that you actually use and probably go ahead and add some things there. And then the next video, I'll show you how to throw on some extra secret sauce stuff. But let's go ahead and get into this one because we're literally almost done. So at the top here, at the very beginning of your menu icons is the star, and this is your My Menu. You can create a lot of pages for this depending on what you need, but I encourage you to keep it fairly simple. Mine has expanded bigger than anything of what my other cameras could do, just because this camera can do more things. But let's say we want to add something to my menu settings. For you, that may be my menu number 1, or you could be adding it to page 4 as I'm doing here. But what you do is come down to the My Menu setting, select Add an Item. Now, this will rotate in the same options as you would get on your regular camera menus. It's just going to omit the main menu and the My Menu options. So this is what you would see. So wherever that's located in the main menu, it'll be located in the same spot as you would see here. Now, let's say I'm coming down because I want to add the USB streaming option to my menu options. I'll select it, then come down to the page that I want this to save on, scroll over to the right and select where I want this to be. So if I want it to be under the recording lamp icon, then I'll select under. If I want it to be above, then I'd place it there. So if I select it here, it's going to let me know that it's been added, and I can continue going through to add more things. But let's say I'm done, then I'll hit the menu button to go back. If I need to sort or organize the things, I'll come through, go through to what options I want to adjust. So let's say I want to put the streaming one above the recording lamp option, then I can do that. When I'm done, I'll just hit the menu button to go back. But if I want to delete a page, then that's usually most helpful if I set up a page just for a certain event or certain use case, and I won't need that page 99% of the time. I'll just get rid of all of that stuff. But if I just need solely to delete an item, I'll come over here, select where that is, because let's say I have USB streaming someplace else already, then I can come through, delete that item, and it's no longer there. Hit the menu to go back, and I'm back to my main options. Now, you can move stuff from page to page. It just depends on what you have. So if I want a recording lamp on one of these earlier menus, I can adjust and put the things that I'm not using as often further to the bottom, and the things that I use a lot further to the top. To give you an idea of the things I prefer to have in my menu setup, for the main one, I have the proxy recordings, the file format, the movie settings, my log shooting settings, my anti-flicker settings, HDMI info, and the format. And even though a lot of these options are available on my swipe options, I may already be in the menu and need to change something. I just don't want the hassle of having to flip back and forth to get one thing or another. There are certain things that I have in multiple locations, so I can access it. If I'm on the camera screen, I can get it between my quick menu and my quick function menus, between my on-screen menu, or if I'm in the menu already, then I can come in here and just go to the My Menu. A very quick way to cycle through any of these menus so you don't have to use the up, down, left, and right is just to hit the function button and it'll cycle through for you. If you need to go page by page and just scroll down instead of using the down directional button, you can use the dial at the top right of the camera where your thumb would rest, and it'll cycle through the various tabs for you. So that's just some quick ways to navigate through your menus without having to use the up, down, left, and right directional buttons. So you finally made it through this entire video. Put the secret code down in the chat. You are the bee's knees if you got to this point in the video. Now, you set all this stuff up. You literally should not have to change anything in these menu options unless you just want to, or you make decisions differently on how you plan to create later on down the road. But there is one thing that most people don't think about that on this camera, and even similar ones that have come out since then, that the menu is very, very similar. Now, I'm going to show you how I customize my use in actual recording and how I'm actually creating behind the scenes, so you can see not just what my button layout and stuff is from the menu side, but some stuff that I do when I'm actually recording, so that your creative experience is that much more enjoyable, saves you time, and you can create out content even faster. That video is down in the description and coming up on the screen next, and you're going to enjoy it because I'm telling you, it is the bee's knees.